Good evening, dreamers. Tonight we venture into something a little more intimate, a tale of forbidden desire, golden chambers, and deadly secrets. We're diving into what it was really like to be the hidden lover of a pharaoh in ancient Egypt. Forget the romanticized Hollywood depictions of passionate desert romance, where love conquers all obstacles and hearts triumph over politics. The truth? You probably wouldn't survive the political intrigue for more than a few months. And if you did, the psychological cost would reshape everything you thought you knew about love, power, and the price of impossibility. So before you settle in for tonight's extended journey, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to join our growing community of night owls, who understand that the most fascinating stories happen in the spaces between official history and hidden truth. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Are you tucked in bed in Tokyo, watching the city lights flicker like ancient oil lamps? Walking through London fog that seems to carry whispers from centuries past? Watching the sunrise paint Snow Paulo in colors that would have made pharaohs weep with envy? Now, dim those lights completely, find your most comfortable position, and prepare for a journey that will take us deep into the labyrinth of royal passion and political survival. Let's slip into tonight's extended exploration together. Congratulations! You've just opened your eyes in the year 1391 BC, in the hidden chambers beneath the palace of Amenhotep III. The good news? You're lying on silk sheets worth more than most people's entire lives, in rooms that officially don't exist, surrounded by luxury that would make modern billionaires seem modest. The bad news? If anyone discovers you here, you'll be buried alive alongside the pharaoh's other secrets, your body mummified while your heart still beats, your story erased from history as if you never drew breath. This is your life now. Welcome to paradise with a death sentence. You wake not to the harsh call of roosters that pierce the pre-dawn darkness in common Egyptian households, nor to the grinding of grain mills that marks the beginning of another day of subsistence for the masses who toil under the pharaoh's rule. Instead, your consciousness emerges gradually from dreams perfumed with frankincense, stirred gently by the almost musical tinkling of golden wind chimes that hang in windows carved from limestone, so fine it seems to capture and hold the desert light long after the sun has moved on. These chimes are not mere decoration. They're precision instruments crafted by the same artisans who create the delicate mechanisms that regulate water flow in the pharaoh's private gardens. Each tone has been calculated to produce harmonics that promote restful sleep and peaceful awakening. Their frequencies based on mathematical principles that most Egyptian scholars guard as closely as military secrets. The metal itself comes from gold mines in Nubia, transported along trade routes that exist solely to serve royal pleasures, refined through processes that have taken generations to perfect. The sound drifts through latticed windows that represent months of work by stone carvers, whose entire lives have been dedicated to achieving impossible delicacy in the hardest materials. The limestone has been quarried from deposits discovered specifically for their unusual properties. Stone that can be carved so thin it becomes almost translucent while retaining enough strength to support the weight of the elaborate architectural features that conceal your chambers from the palace's official layout. Every morning begins with this gentle symphony of crafted beauty. But today you're more aware than usual of the layers of human effort and ingenuity that have gone into creating your impossible refuge. Perhaps it's because last night's conversation with Amenhotep touched on the practical challenges of maintaining such an elaborate deception. Or perhaps it's because your dreams were filled with images of the simple reed mat you once slept on, back when your greatest luxury was a daily ration of beer that wasn't completely sour. Your fingers trace the silk beneath you, fabric that has traveled distances so vast they seem mythological. This particular weaving comes from artisans in distant eastern kingdoms, where silk production is guarded more carefully than military strategies. The threads have been dyed using pigments that cost more per ounce than silver, colors that don't exist in nature, but have been coaxed from rare minerals and exotic plants through alchemical processes that border on magic. The deep purple that dominates the pattern comes from murex shells harvested in dangerous waters, where divers risk their lives to gather enough material to produce a few yards of thread. The blue requires lapis lazuli ground to powder, so fine it must be handled with tools made from precious metals to prevent contamination. The gold threads woven throughout are not merely decorative but functional, containing actual gold beaten so thin it becomes flexible while retaining its eternal luster. Each sheet represents not just incredible expense, but months of human labor coordinated across vast distances, trade negotiations that might influence the relationships between kingdoms, and logistical challenges that require the kind of organizational skills typically reserved for military campaigns. You sleep every night wrapped in what amounts to a small nation's annual tribute, cushioned by luxury that entire cities will never experience. This morning, as you stretch muscles that have grown soft from months of this impossible pampered existence, you're particularly conscious of how your body has adapted to a life without physical hardship. Gone are the calluses that once marked your hands as someone who worked for survival, the permanent ink stains that identified you as a scribe, the slight forward curve of your spine that came from years of hunching over papyrus scrolls in poorly lit copying rooms. Instead, your palms are smooth, anointed daily with oils of frankincense and myrrh that have been blessed by priests and filtered through processes that remove every impurity while concentrating their healing and beautifying properties. Your skin has taken on the luminous quality that comes from regular applications of honey mixed with ground pearls. A beauty treatment so expensive, it's typically reserved for preparing royal corpses for their eternal journey. Your body, once lean from the modest diet of bread, onions, and beer that sustained most Egyptian workers, now curves with the pleasant weight that comes from daily feasts of delicacies that most people taste only in descriptions from travelers' tailies. Honey cakes prepared with nuts that grow only in the Pharaoh's private orchards. Roasted duck stuffed with dates and almonds, the meat so tender it requires no chewing. Fresh fruits that have been selectively bred over generations to achieve sweetness that borders on the supernatural. The morning ritual begins with the appearance of servants who seem to materialize from the walls themselves, so silent and sudden is their arrival. But you've learned to recognize the subtle signs that announce their presence. The almost imperceptible change in air pressure as hidden doorways open, the whisper of feet trained to move without creating sound, the faint scent of the special oils they use to keep hinges and mechanisms operating in perfect silence. These are not ordinary palace servants. Each has been selected through a process more rigorous than the training of elite soldiers, chosen not just for their skills, but for their psychological profiles, their capacity for absolute discretion, their ability to function effectively while carrying secrets that could topple kingdoms. They've undergone training that includes memory techniques for managing multiple layers of deception, physical conditioning that allows them to work for hours without rest, and psychological conditioning that makes betrayal literally unthinkable. They speak in whispers when they speak at all, but you've learned to read the elaborate sign language they use for most communication. Their movements have been choreographed to create a kind of living poetry, each gesture serving multiple purposes, while maintaining the aesthetic harmony that characterizes everything in your hidden world. Their own lives have been transformed by their service to your secret existence. They live in quarters more luxurious than most nobles enjoy, eat food prepared by royal chefs, wear clothing made from fabrics that mark them as belonging to the highest levels of palace society. But they've also accepted a form of permanent exile from normal human relationships, bound by oaths that make their entire existence dependent on maintaining the fiction that you don't exist. The head servant, a woman named Anxizineman, whose intelligence and discretion have made her invaluable to the royal household's most sensitive operations, begins each day by briefing you on the subtle changes in palace routine that might affect your safety. This morning, she reports that Queen Tai has been unusually active in reviewing architectural plans for various palace improvements, a development that requires increased vigilance, but doesn't yet constitute immediate danger. The Queen's interest appears focused on the eastern wing. Anchisenaman explains in the barely audible whisper that has become her normal speaking voice. She's consulting with architects about modernizing the ceremonial chambers, which could potentially lead to discoveries if the work extends into areas adjacent to your quarters. We're monitoring the situation closely. The information reminds you that your safety depends not just on the loyalty of your immediate protectors, but on a complex intelligence network that extends throughout the palace complex. Servants loyal to your cause occupy positions in every department, from the kitchens that prepare your meals to the workshops that maintain the mechanical systems that enable your concealment. This morning's bath has been prepared in a chamber that represents one of the engineering marvels of your hidden complex. The bathing pool is fed by a system of channels that bring water from sacred springs located days away from the palace. The liquid heated by a hypocaust system borrowed from Roman engineering, but refined through Egyptian innovations. The water maintains a constant temperature through mechanisms so sophisticated that even the engineers who built them don't fully understand how all the components work together. Rose petals float on the surface, but these aren't ordinary flowers picked from common gardens. These roses grow only in a secret greenhouse built specifically to provide flowers for your bathing rituals, tended by gardeners who have developed new cultivation techniques to produce blooms of unprecedented size, color, and fragrance. The petals have been selected at the precise moment of peak perfection, gathered before dawn when their essential oils are most concentrated, treated with preservation methods that maintain their properties for exactly the duration of your bathing session. As you sink into water that feels like liquid silk against your skin, gentle hands begin the daily ritual of massage and purification that has become as essential to your routine as breathing. But these aren't merely servants attending to your physical comfort. Each person touching you has been trained in healing arts that combine Egyptian medical knowledge with techniques learned from healers across the known world. The oils they use have been specifically formulated for your individual skin and constitution, blended according to principles that take into account not just your physical needs, but your emotional state, your intellectual pursuits, even your dreams from the previous night. The lotus oil being massaged into your shoulders contains compounds that promote mental clarity while reducing physical tension. The jasmine essence applied to your temples has been prepared using distillation methods that concentrate its ability to enhance creativity and emotional balance. Your weekly sessions with the palace's master perfumer have resulted in a signature scent that exists nowhere else in the world. A fragrance so complex and distinctive that Amenhotep can detect traces of your presence in chambers you visited hours after you've left. This scent has become part of your identity, an invisible signature that marks you as belonging to a realm beyond ordinary human experience. The massage continues with techniques that represent centuries of accumulated knowledge about human anatomy and the relationship between physical comfort and mental acuity. Your muscles, once tight from years of scribal work, have been systematically retrained to hold your body in positions that project confidence and grace. Your posture has been refined through daily exercises that strengthen some muscle groups, while deliberately relaxing others, creating a carriage that speaks of aristocratic breeding, even though you were born into a family of modest merchants. As gentle hands work aromatic oils into skin that has never known real hardship since your arrival in these chambers, you remember the ache that once lived permanently in your shoulders, the constant tension that came from hunching over scrolls from dawn until the stars appeared. Your back had curved like a question mark from years of transcribing trade agreements and tax records, documenting the mundane machinery that kept the greatest empire on earth functioning, while never participating in the wealth and power your work helped to maintain. Now, your spine straightens with the confidence of someone who sleeps on cushions stuffed with the finest goose down, imported from northern regions where wild geese grow plumage of unprecedented softness. You recline against pillows filled with petals from flowers that bloom only in the Pharaoh's private gardens, their fragrance carefully calibrated to promote the kind of deep, restorative sleep that leaves you refreshed and alert for the intellectual challenges that fill your days. The servants who attend your bath move with choreographed precision, each gesture serving multiple purposes, while maintaining the aesthetic harmony that characterizes everything in your hidden world. They wash your hair with preparations that contain ingredients gathered from across the known world, honey from bees that feed only on specific wildflowers, oils extracted from nuts that grow only in particular climatic conditions, minerals dissolved in water drawn from sources considered sacred by various religious traditions. Your hair, once coarse from poor nutrition and exposure to harsh working conditions, now falls in waves that seem to capture and reflect light with an almost supernatural brilliance. The treatments you receive have gradually transformed its texture and color, bringing out natural highlights that you never knew existed, while strengthening each strand to withstand the elaborate styling that marks you as someone of extraordinary status. The drying process involves towels woven from cotton, so fine it seems almost insubstantial, fabric that has been treated with processes that make it simultaneously absorbent and caressing. Even this simple aspect of your routine represents luxury beyond the imagination of most humans, comfort so complete that you've begun to take it for granted, despite your conscious efforts to remain aware of its extraordinary nature. The servants dress you in garments that would make queens jealous, but your morning routine includes choosing from a wardrobe that represents the accumulated fashion knowledge of multiple civilizations. Linen so fine, it's almost transparent, woven by blind women whose other senses have been heightened to achieve impossible perfection in their craft. The fabric whispers against your skin like secrets, its texture so refined that wearing it feels like being caressed by concentrated moonlight. This particular linen comes from flax grown in fields that have been prepared with soil treatments that took decades to develop, irrigated with water that has been filtered through systems that remove not just impurities but any trace elements that might interfere with the fabric's ultimate perfection. The plants are harvested at the precise moment when their fibers reach peak quality, processed using techniques that have been refined over generations to achieve results that seem to transcend the physical limitations of natural materials. Gold threads woven into patterns that tell stories of gods and mortals create narrative tapestries that you wear like living literature. Each thread represents not just precious metal, but months of work by artisans who have spent their entire lives mastering the techniques required to transform gold into something flexible enough to be woven while retaining its eternal beauty. The patterns themselves encode mythological stories and philosophical concepts, making your clothing a form of wearable education that reflects your status as someone worthy of intellectual as well as physical adornment. The stories woven into today's garment depict the romance between Isis and Osiris, their love transcending death itself, their relationship serving as a template for the kind of passion that justifies any sacrifice and survives any separation. The symbolism is not coincidental. Amenhotep personally selected this pattern during one of your evening conversations about the nature of love that exists beyond conventional boundaries. Jewelry follows, pieces crafted by the same artisans who create burial treasures for pharaohs, ornaments designed to be beautiful enough for eternity. But your daily jewelry serves purposes beyond mere decoration. Each piece has been designed to complement your particular features while conveying subtle messages about your status and sophistication. The lapis lazuli necklace you wear today contains stones quarried from deposits discovered in mountains, so remote that reaching them requires expeditions that take months and cost more than most people earn in their lifetimes. The blue of these stones seems to contain the essence of deep water and limitless sky, colors that shift and change as you move, creating an almost hypnotic effect that draws attention, while simultaneously suggesting depths that cannot be easily fathomed. The emeralds in your earrings have been selected not just for their size and clarity, but for their particular shade of green, a color that captures the essence of the Nile during its annual flooding, when the river brings life to the desert and makes Egyptian civilization possible. These stones have been cut using techniques that maximize their ability to catch and reflect light, creating tiny prisons that hold captured rainbows, miniature universes of concentrated beauty. The gold settings that hold these precious stones represent craftsmanship so sophisticated that the techniques used to create them are considered state secrets. The metal has been worked using tools and methods that produce results impossible to achieve through conventional goldsmithing, creating surfaces that seem to generate their own light while maintaining the delicate strength necessary to secure stones of extraordinary value. But the most significant piece of jewelry you wear is also the most subtle. A golden bracelet that appears to be merely another ornament, but actually serves as a communication device. Hidden within its decorative pattern are tiny mechanisms that can produce barely audible sounds, coded signals that allow Amenhotep to communicate with you even when you're separated by the complex protocols that govern his public life. This morning, the bracelet carries a message that makes your heart accelerate with anticipation. Sunset, garden chamber. Come hungry for ideas as well as food. I have discoveries to share. The weight of these ornaments reminds you constantly of your precarious position. You're decorated like a deity, adorned with precious materials that mark you as belonging to the highest levels of human achievement. Yet you exist in shadows that could become your tomb if the wrong person discovers the truth about your presence in the palace. You're dressed like royalty while living like the most carefully guarded secret in the most powerful empire on earth. Breakfast arrives on platters of silver and gold that have been crafted by artisans whose techniques represent centuries of accumulated metallurgical knowledge. The serving pieces themselves are works of art that would be treasured in temples and palaces throughout the known world. Yet here, they serve the mundane purpose of presenting your daily meal. The designs engraved into their surfaces tell stories from Egyptian mythology while demonstrating technical skills that border on the supernatural. The food itself represents a symphony of flavors that your former life never imagined possible. Dates stuffed with almonds and soaked in honey that has been aged in clay vessels for specific periods to achieve particular flavor profiles. The honey itself comes from bees that feed exclusively on flowers grown in the royal gardens, producing varieties of sweetness that exist nowhere else in the world. Bread baked with seeds from across the known world creates combinations of texture and taste that transform simple sustenance into complex aesthetic experiences. Each loaf contains ingredients that have traveled thousands of miles to reach your table, spices from kingdoms that exist only in traders' tailies, grains developed through agricultural techniques that took generations to perfect, oils extracted from plants that grow only in specific climatic conditions. Fish from the Red Sea arrives fresh despite the distance it has traveled, preserved through methods that maintain its delicate flavor while preventing any deterioration during transport. The flesh has the texture of flower petals, so tender it seems to dissolve on your tongue while releasing flavors that speak of clean water and careful preparation. These fish are caught by specialists who understand exactly when and how to harvest them for peak quality, transported by couriers who race against time to deliver them while their perfection remains intact. Fruits that have been cultivated in the royal gardens through selective breeding programs that span decades arrive at perfect ripeness, their sweetness concentrated through agricultural techniques that produce results impossible to achieve through natural growing methods. Each piece of fruit represents not just nutrition, but genetic artistry, the culmination of efforts to transcend the normal limitations of natural food production. You eat slowly, not just to savor the extraordinary flavors, but to fully appreciate the impossibility of your situation. 6 months ago, you were calculating grain stores and recording tribute payments, your stomach growling as you worked through meals you couldn't afford to take. Your diet consisted of bread, onions, and beer, occasionally supplemented with dried fish when your finances allowed such luxury. Your hands were stained permanently with the cheap inks used for everyday administrative work, colors that marked your fingers as belonging to someone who performed necessary but unremarkable labor. Your clothes were simple linen that you washed yourself in the Nile, garments that served practical purposes without any pretense to beauty or status. You slept on a reed mat in a room you shared with 3 other scribes, the sound of their snoring mixing with the distant noise of a city that never truly slept. Your entertainment consisted of occasional festivals and the simple pleasure of a well-copied scroll, moments of satisfaction that came from completing tasks competently, rather than from experiencing genuine luxury or intellectual stimulation. Your greatest aspiration was to eventually advance to a position where you might copy more important documents, perhaps even work on projects that brought you into contact with minor officials who had seen the Pharaoh from a distance. The possibility of personal interaction with anyone of real significance seemed as remote as the possibility of traveling to the edge of the world. Now, silence is your constant companion, but it's not the absence of sound so much as the presence of discretion, so complete it feels supernatural. Even the servants' footsteps are muffled by techniques learned from military scouts, their breathing controlled through exercises that allow them to move and work without creating any sound that might be detected by unwanted listeners. The very air in your chambers seems different from ordinary air, treated through systems that filter out not just dust and impurities, but any sense that might suggest unusual activity to sensitive noses. The temperature is maintained at precisely the level that promotes both comfort and alertness, regulated through mechanisms so sophisticated that they operate without any visible signs of their presence. This controlled environment creates a sensation of existing outside normal time and space, as if your chambers exist in a dimension parallel to, but separate from the ordinary world. The effect is both wonderful and deeply isolating, a reminder that your extraordinary comfort comes at the cost of connection to the common, human experience that once defined your life. Every object in your chambers has been selected not just for its practical function, but for its contribution to an overall aesthetic that speaks of refinement, beyond ordinary human achievement. The tables are carved from woods that grow only in forests considered sacred by various religious traditions. The chairs are upholstered with fabrics that required years to produce. Their patterns based on mathematical principles that create visual harmonies similar to musical compositions. Even the books and scrolls that fill your library represent treasures that most scholars never had the opportunity to examine. Love poetry from Mesopotamian courts, where writers developed forms of literary expression that influenced every subsequent tradition of romantic literature. Philosophical treatises from Greek city-states, where thinkers explored questions about the nature of reality, knowledge, and human purpose that remain relevant thousands of years later. Astronomical observations from Babylonian scholars who mapped the movements of celestial bodies with precision that allowed them to predict eclipses and calculate calendars with accuracy that wouldn't be improved upon for centuries. Mathematical texts that reveal computational methods so advanced they seem to anticipate discoveries that won't be made by other civilizations for generations. These are not the agricultural reports and tax documents that once filled your days as a working scribe. Documents important for administrative purposes, but offering little intellectual stimulation. Instead, you have access to the collected wisdom and creative achievement of the known world, gathered here specifically for your entertainment and education. Amenhotep wants his secret love to be worthy of royal conversation, to understand the complexity of the world he rules and the depth of thought that informs his decision-making. Your education has become a royal project, an attempt to create an intellectual companion who can engage with ideas at the level that his position demands, but his public life rarely allows him to explore. As you read this morning, working through a particularly challenging passage from a Greek philosopher who argues that reality consists of eternal forms that exist beyond the physical world we perceive through our senses, you practice the subtle arts that have become essential to your survival. You've learned how to move through your chambers without creating shadows that might be noticed by anyone observing the palace from unexpected angles. Your body has been trained to avoid positions and gestures that might be visible through the carefully concealed windows that provide light while maintaining your concealment from external observation. You've mastered the art of modulating your voice so it carries exactly the emotional content you intend without any volume that might penetrate the sound dampening systems built into your walls. You can express passion in whispers, convey urgency through gestures so small they might be mistaken for ordinary adjustments of clothing or hair. Your entire physical vocabulary has been refined to operate within the constraints imposed by the need for absolute secrecy. Yet somehow this limitation has enhanced, rather than diminished, your ability to communicate. Like poetry that achieves greater impact through formal restrictions, your enforced subtlety has taught you to convey complex meanings through minimal means. You've learned the rhythm of the palace with the precision of a musician mastering a complex composition. You know when Queen Tai takes her afternoon rest, when she's most likely to be distracted by royal business, when her attention might be focused in directions that could bring her into proximity with your hidden existence. You understand the schedules of high priests who gather for their daily consultations about religious matters that interweave with political decisions. You know when the royal children have their lessons, when their tutors might be moving through corridors that could provide unwanted glimpses into areas that should remain unobserved. You've memorized the routines of kitchen servants, knowing when shifts change and new personnel might be, unfamiliar with the subtle modifications that allow your meals to be prepared and delivered without creating administrative anomalies that could attract investigation. Your entire existence has become a carefully choreographed dance around the movements and attention of others. A performance where missing a step doesn't just mean embarrassment, but death. The complexity of this choreography would be overwhelming if you tried to consciously manage every detail, but it has become as natural as breathing through months of careful practice and constant reinforcement. The afternoon brings subtle changes in the quality of light filtering through your concealed windows, signals that help you track the passage of time in an environment where normal temporal markers have been replaced by the artificial rhythms of hidden life. You know that somewhere in the palace, Amenhotep is moving through the public requirements of his divine role, receiving tribute from foreign delegations, consulting with advisors about military and economic matters, performing the religious ceremonies that maintain his spiritual authority over millions of subjects. Each of his official activities takes place in spaces designed to reinforce his status as a living god, surrounded by art and architecture that speaks of power beyond human limitation, attended by protocols that emphasize the distance between divine Pharaoh and mortal subjects. His clothing, his posture, his voice, even his facial expressions are all carefully controlled to project the image of someone who embodies cosmic order and divine wisdom. But you know the man behind this performance. Understand the human intelligence and emotion that must be concealed beneath the mask of divinity. You've seen him tired, uncertain, even afraid. You've watched him struggle with decisions that affect millions of lives, witnessed his relief when he can temporarily set aside the burden of being responsible for maintaining the cosmic balance that keeps Egyptian civilization functioning. This knowledge makes you unique in his world, the only person who knows both the public pharaoh and the private man, the only relationship in his life that isn't shaped by the requirements of his political and religious position. The weight of this uniqueness is both privilege and responsibility, a form of intimacy so rare it feels almost sacred. As the sun begins its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that seem designed to reflect the opulence of your surroundings, you hear the sound you've been waiting for, a barely audible sequence of taps on the wall that separates your chambers from Amenhotep's private study. The code you've developed together has evolved into a language sophisticated enough to convey complex ideas and subtle emotions. Today's message is more elaborate than usual. Sunset, garden chamber. Come hungry for both food and ideas. I have made discoveries that will change how we understand our situation. Bring the scroll about eternal forms. Your heart accelerates with an excitement that 6 months of this routine hasn't diminished. Every meeting with Amenhotep feels like the first, carries the same electric anticipation, mixed with the constant awareness that it could be the last. But today's message suggests something beyond your usual intimate conversations. Some development that could affect the fundamental nature of your relationship. You begin preparing not just your appearance, but your mind, reviewing the philosophical concepts you've been studying, organizing thoughts about questions that have emerged from your reading, anticipating the kind of intellectual exchange that makes your hidden life feel worthwhile, despite its dangers and limitations. The servants notice your change in energy and begin their own preparations with the efficiency of professionals who have rehearsed these procedures until they operate like clockwork. Guards are repositioned through signals, so subtle they're invisible to anyone not specifically watching for them. Alternative routes are cleared through verification procedures that ensure no unexpected obstacles will compromise your movement through the palace's hidden passages. The machinery of secrecy that surrounds your existence shifts into its highest gear, a complex ballet of deception that involves dozens of people coordinating their activities with precision that would be impressive in a military operation. Every servant, guard, and administrator who contributes to your concealment understands that success depends on perfect execution by every participant. As the sun approaches the horizon, transforming the desert landscape into a canvas of gold and crimson that speaks of the eternal beauty that has inspired Egyptian art for thousands of years, you make your way through passages that exist in the spaces between the palace's official architecture. These corridors are marvels of engineering that demonstrate the sophisticated understanding of structural principles that Egyptian builders have developed over centuries of monumental construction. They're designed for discretion rather than grandeur, but even their utilitarian purpose hasn't prevented their creators from incorporating aesthetic elements that transform necessary spaces into beautiful environments. The walls are decorated with scenes that tell stories about famous lovers from Egyptian mythology, couples whose relationships transcended normal social boundaries and achieved forms of immortality through the intensity of their passion. The images serve both as decoration and as inspiration, reminders that the love you and Amenhotep share belongs to a tradition that extends back to the very foundations of Egyptian civilization. Oil lamps provide illumination that creates dancing shadows on walls, carved with hieroglyphs that record the wisdom of ages about the relationship between love and power, passion and political necessity, the human heart and the divine order that governs both earthly and cosmic affairs. The very air seems charged with the accumulated energy of centuries of secret meetings, clandestine conversations, and hidden relationships that have shaped the course of history. The garden chamber awaits like a jewel hidden in the heart of the vast palace complex, a space that exists entirely for these precious meetings between you and the man who rules an empire but finds his greatest treasure in these stolen moments of genuine human connection. This chamber represents one of the architectural miracles that make your entire hidden existence possible. It's built around a small courtyard where rare flowers bloom, under a sky that can be seen only from this one secret place in the palace. The design creates perfect acoustic privacy while allowing access to natural light and fresh air, solving engineering challenges that most builders would consider impossible. Water features create a gentle background noise that masks conversation while providing the psychological comfort that comes from the sound of flowing water in a desert environment. The fountains themselves are works of art that demonstrate the mathematical precision required to create water displays that achieve both functional and aesthetic perfection. The walls are lined with alcoves containing gifts that Amenhotep has collected for you from across his empire. Each object chosen not just for its beauty or rarity, but for its capacity to stimulate conversation and intellectual exploration. Ivory carvings from Nubia that depict scenes from creation myths, their artistic style encoding philosophical concepts about the relationship between divine creativity and human aspiration. Silk tapestries from distant Asian kingdoms that tell stories about legendary lovers whose relationships influenced the political and cultural development of entire civilizations. The weaving techniques themselves represent artistic achievements that won't be duplicated for centuries, while the stories they illustrate provide material for discussions about the universal nature of human passion. Jeweled daggers from Arabian smiths whose metalworking skills produce blades that seem to capture and concentrate light, their handles decorated with precious stones, arranged in patterns that encode mathematical principles used in calculating celestial movements. These are not merely weapons, but teaching tools that demonstrate the relationship between artistic beauty and practical knowledge. Musical instruments whose melodies can transport listeners to realms of experience beyond ordinary consciousness. Their construction, based on acoustic principles that produce harmonics capable of inducing specific emotional and mental states. Each instrument comes with compositions written specifically for private performance, music that exists nowhere else in the world. Tonight, the chamber has been prepared with particular care, the usual flowers supplemented with varieties that bloom only in darkness. Their fragrance is designed to stimulate intellectual clarity while promoting emotional openness. The lighting has been adjusted to create an atmosphere that encourages the kind of deep conversation that can last for hours without fatigue. You settle onto cushions arranged around a low table set with delicacies that change with each meeting, tonight featuring foods that complement the philosophical themes of your planned discussion. Pomegranates from the royal orchards, their ruby seeds representing the kind of hidden treasures that reward patient exploration. Roasted fowl stuffed with dates and nuts, preparation so complex it becomes a metaphor for the intricate processes required to achieve perfection in any endeavor. Wine from grapes that grow only in Amenhotep's private vineyard has been aged in clay vessels sealed with wax that bears the personal mark of the royal winemaker, a craftsman whose techniques produce varieties of intoxication that affect the mind without compromising intellectual clarity. This wine enhances rather than impairs the capacity for sophisticated thought, creating the perfect accompaniment for conversations that range across philosophy, politics, and the eternal questions that have fascinated thinking humans throughout history. And then he arrives, and suddenly all the luxury surrounding you becomes mere background to the single fact of his presence. Amenhotep enters not as the divine Pharaoh, whose word is law across an empire that stretches from Nubia to the Euphrates, but as a man whose eyes light up when they find yours, whose movements lose their formal royal bearing and become natural, almost boyish in their eagerness. The transformation is complete and instantaneous, a reminder of how much energy he expends maintaining his public persona and how much relief he finds in these moments when he can simply be human. The careful control that governs his every public gesture falls away, replaced by the natural grace of someone who feels completely safe and utterly valued. He has removed the heavy regalia of his office, the golden crown that weighs several pounds, and the ceremonial jewelry that marks him as the living embodiment of divine authority. Instead, he wears simple linen, though even his casual clothes are woven with a fineness that most nobles never experience. The garments fit him perfectly because they've been made by tailors who understand his body as well as his aesthetic preferences, crafted from materials selected specifically for their ability to provide comfort while maintaining the understated elegance that suits his personal rather than public identity. His skin still carries the scent of the sacred oils used in his daily religious ceremonies, frankincense and myrrh mixed with notes of cedar, and lotus that have been applied according to ritual requirements that connect him to the divine realm he represents. But beneath these formal fragrances, you detect the smell that is uniquely his, warm and earthy, and fundamentally human. "My hidden treasure," he says, and his voice carries none of the formal intonation he uses when addressing courtiers or foreign dignitaries. With you, he speaks in the accent of his childhood, before years of royal training taught him to project divine authority in every syllable. The difference is subtle but profound, marking the transition from Pharaoh to man, from public figure to private person. "Tell me about your day," he continues, settling onto cushions with the comfortable ease of someone who has learned to find relaxation in your presence. "What did you read? What did you think? What questions kept your mind active while I was trapped in the ceremonial requirements of divine rulership?" 3 months have passed since that evening conversation about eternal forms and hidden realities. 3 months during which your understanding of love, power, and survival has deepened in ways that have fundamentally changed how you perceive your impossible situation. The patterns of your hidden life have become so established they feel as permanent as the architectural features that conceal your existence. Yet underneath this comfortable predictability, you've begun to notice changes that create a constant undercurrent of anxiety. The changes are subtle, the kind of shifts that might escape notice unless you've spent months learning to read the intricate patterns that govern palace life. Servants move differently now, their usual fluid efficiency replaced by a kind of controlled tension that suggests they're constantly prepared for unexpected developments. Conversations stop more abruptly when you approach, not because of any breach in protocol, but because the topics under discussion have become more sensitive than usual. Guard rotations have changed 3 times in the past month, always with explanations that sound perfectly reasonable, but feel somehow incomplete. The official reasons cite routine security assessments and personnel optimization, but the timing coincides with other subtle modifications in palace, procedure that suggest a more systematic review of access and information flow. Even the food has evolved, shifting from delicacies that require complex preparation involving multiple kitchen staff to simpler dishes that can be prepared quickly and quietly by fewer people. The change doesn't affect the quality of your meals, but it reduces the number of individuals who need to know about your special dietary requirements, streamlining the conspiracy that sustains your existence while potentially making it less visible to unwanted observation. You wake this particular morning not to the familiar sound of wind chimes singing in the desert breeze, but to urgent whispers in the corridor beyond your sleeping chamber. The voices are too low to make out specific words, but the tone carries unmistakable urgency mixed with the kind of fear that comes from dealing with situations that threaten not just individual safety, but the stability of the entire system that protects your secret existence. Your body responds with the animal alertness of prey, sensing the approach of predators, muscles tensing despite months of luxurious living that has softened your responses to most forms of stress. The primitive survival instincts that sustained you through years of precarious existence as a working scribe have never entirely disappeared, lying dormant beneath the surface of your pampered current life, but always ready to emerge when circumstances require them. And Keseneman, your primary servant, and the person most responsible for coordinating the complex logistics that enable your concealment, enters your chamber with movements that are too controlled, too careful. Her usual calm efficiency has been replaced by something that looks like barely suppressed panic, the kind of emotional state that emerges when carefully maintained systems begin to show signs of fundamental instability. The change in her demeanor is particularly alarming because Ankhesenamen has demonstrated remarkable composure in managing the countless small crises that inevitably arise when maintaining such an elaborate deception. She's handled everything from supply shortages to personnel conflicts to mechanical failures in the systems that regulate your environment, always with the same unflappable professionalism that marks her as someone capable of thinking clearly under pressure. "My lady," she says, using the title that acknowledges your unofficial status without naming it directly, "there have been developments that require immediate attention to your safety and potentially fundamental changes in how we manage your protection." The formal language is itself a warning. Ankhesenamen typically speaks to you with warmth and familiarity that reflects the genuine affection that has developed between you during months of daily interaction. She treats you almost like a younger sister whose welfare has become personally important to her, not just a professional responsibility. This sudden return to court protocol tells you that the situation has become serious enough to override personal relationships and require the kind of procedural formality that governs responses to genuine emergencies. The implications make your stomach clench with the familiar sensation of fear that you haven't experienced since the early days of your concealment, when every sound seemed potentially threatening and every change in routine suggested the possibility of discovery. "What kind of developments?" you ask, though part of you already knows that you don't want to hear the answer. The luxury that has surrounded you for months has created a psychological buffer against the constant awareness of danger that characterized your early days in these chambers. Now that buffer is being stripped away, forcing you to confront the reality that your safety has always been more precarious than it appeared. A servant in Queen Tai's personal retinue has been asking questions about the architectural plans for this section of the palace. Ankhesenamen explains, her voice maintained at the barely audible whisper that has become standard for any conversation that might touch on sensitive subjects. She's specifically interested in discrepancies between the official blueprints filed with the Royal Architectural Office and the actual layout of the rooms as they currently exist. The blood seems to freeze in your veins as you process the implications of this information. Queen Tai's servants don't investigate architectural issues out of idle curiosity or routine maintenance concerns. If one of her people is examining discrepancies between official plans and actual construction, it means the Queen has noticed something that aroused her suspicion and is now systematically investigating until she finds answers that satisfy her formidable intelligence. Queen Tai is not just Amenhotep's wife, but his intellectual equal and political partner, a woman whose survival and success in the deadly intrigues of royal court life demonstrate intelligence and ruthlessness that have made her one of the most powerful figures in the ancient world. She's eliminated rivals, secured alliances, and protected her position through a combination of strategic thinking and willingness to take decisive action that has established her as someone who cannot be underestimated or misled for long. If Queen Tai has become suspicious about architectural irregularities in the section of the palace that houses your chambers, it suggests that your concealment may have left traces visible to someone with the knowledge and motivation to look for them. The systems designed to hide your existence were created to fool casual observation and routine inspection, but they may not be sophisticated enough to withstand the kind of systematic investigation that someone of Tai's capabilities could conduct. Yesterday, Ankhesenamen continues, she requested permission to inspect the chambers adjacent to yours, claiming she's investigating potential structural weakness that could affect the Queen's safety during her regular visits to this section of the palace for meetings with her personal advisors. The excuse is brilliant in its simplicity and its difficulty to challenge. Queen Tai's safety is a legitimate concern that no one in the palace hierarchy would question or obstruct. Her request to inspect chambers for structural integrity provides perfect cover for the kind of detailed examination that could reveal the concealed entrances, modified walls, and hidden passages that make your existence possible. More importantly, Her claim about regular visits to this section of the palace suggests that she's been conducting surveillance of the area, possibly for weeks or months, carefully documenting patterns of activity that might have revealed inconsistencies requiring further investigation. The Queen is not acting on sudden suspicion, but on carefully accumulated evidence that something in this area doesn't match official records or expected behavior. How much time do we have? You ask, surprised by how calm your voice sounds despite the terror that seems to be coursing through every cell in your body. The months of luxury have not eliminated your capacity to function under pressure, but they have created enough psychological distance from immediate danger that returning to crisis management feels disorienting and surreal. Unknown, Ankhesenamen admits, and the uncertainty in her voice is more frightening than definitive bad news would be. The inspection could happen today, tomorrow, or next week, depending on Queen Tai's schedule and the priority she assigns to this investigation. But my lady, there's more, and it's worse. The idea that there could be developments worse than Queen Tai's investigation into your hidden chambers seems impossible. But Ankhesenamen's expression suggests that the situation has dimensions you haven't yet grasped. The complexity of maintaining your secret existence means that threats can emerge from multiple directions simultaneously, creating cascade effects that transform manageable problems into existential crises. 3 days ago, she continues, one of the kitchen servants who prepares your special meals was found dead in his quarters. The official cause was given as a sudden fever, but the timing, combined with other recent events, is deeply concerning. This servant was one of only 5 people with direct knowledge of your dietary requirements and access to the ingredients needed to prepare your meals according to the specifications that maintain your health, while preventing any trace evidence that might reveal your presence. The implication hits you like a physical blow to the chest, making it difficult to breathe normally. Someone is systematically eliminating the people who know about your existence, either to protect the secret by removing potential witnesses, or to send a message that loose tongues will be permanently silenced. Either interpretation suggests that your situation has moved from dangerous to critical, that forces beyond your control are reshaping the landscape of your survival. Furthermore, Ankhesenamen adds, 2 other servants with knowledge of your existence have requested transfers to positions in other parts of the palace, claiming family obligations require them to modify their work assignments. These transfers have been approved with unusual speed, suggesting that their requests were anticipated and accommodated by people with significant administrative authority. The pattern that emerges from these seemingly unrelated events is terrifying in its implications. The network of people who enable your concealment is being dismantled, either through elimination or through strategic reassignment that removes them from positions where they could provide information about your existence. Someone with considerable power and detailed knowledge of your protection system is systematically reducing the number of potential witnesses while creating plausible explanations for their removal. Does Amenhotep know about these developments? You ask, though you suspect you already know the answer. The coordination required to eliminate or relocate multiple servants while arranging for architectural inspections suggests the involvement of someone with access to administrative systems that operate independently of the Pharaoh's direct oversight. The Pharaoh has been in continuous council meetings for the past week. Ankhesenamen confirms, planning military responses to Hittite movements along the northern borders. His schedule has been completely controlled by military advisors and strategic planners, with no opportunities for private communication about domestic matters. Every moment of his time has been accounted for through formal protocols that prevent any unofficial conversations. The isolation of Amenhotep from information about threats to your safety represents either unfortunate timing or deliberate manipulation by someone with enough authority to control access to the Pharaoh. The possibility that your protector has been systematically cut off from knowledge of your danger suggests that whatever forces are moving against you have infiltrated the highest levels of palace administration. What are our options? You ask, though you're increasingly certain that you won't like any of the available alternatives. The complexity of your situation means that every potential solution creates new problems. Every escape route opens new vulnerabilities. Immediate evacuation to the chambers beneath the Temple of Amun, as previously discussed, Ankhesenamun replies. From there, if necessary, complete extraction from the palace complex via the river tunnels that connect to the ancient underground transport system built during the early dynasties. I have boats positioned and supplied for a journey that could take you as far as the Nubian border, where contacts loyal to the Pharaoh could provide sanctuary until the situation stabilizes. The speed and completeness of these preparations tell you that Ankhesenamun and others have been planning for this possibility much longer than you realized. While you've been living in your golden bubble, reading philosophy and waiting for romantic encounters with Amenhotep, a network of people has been working to ensure your survival if the bubble burst. But the very existence of such elaborate backup plans also suggests that your protectors have always known this day would come, that your concealment was never intended as a permanent solution, but as a temporary accommodation that would eventually require more drastic measures to maintain your safety. How many people would die if I disappeared? You ask, facing the moral complexity that has always surrounded your situation, but that your months of luxury have allowed you to avoid confronting directly. Your existence has created a conspiracy that involves dozens of people, from servants to guards to architects to administrators. If you flee, will they be executed as accomplices, or will your absence remove the evidence that could implicate them? Unknown, Ankhesenamun admits, and the honesty in her voice makes clear that she's considered this question repeatedly without reaching comfortable conclusions. But fewer than would die if you're discovered here. A missing person is a problem that can be explained in many ways and eventually forgotten. A forbidden lover found in hidden chambers is evidence of a conspiracy that must be punished completely and publicly to deter future betrayals. The logic is brutal but unavoidable. Your capture wouldn't just mean your own death, but the deaths of everyone who enabled your hidden life. Queen Tai would need to demonstrate that such betrayals of royal order carry consequences severe enough to prevent future conspiracies. The servants who fed you, the guards who protected you, the architects who built your chambers, the craftsmen who furnished them, all would face execution as participants in a deception that threatened the very foundations of royal authority. How long do I have to decide? You ask, though the weight of responsibility for so many lives makes the choice feel predetermined. You cannot sacrifice dozens of people to preserve your own life, or maintain your impossible relationship with Amenhotep, no matter how much that relationship has come to define your sense of meaning and purpose. The boat departs at sunset, whether you're on it or not. Ankhesenamun states with finality that makes clear this timeline is not negotiable. After that, the river route becomes too dangerous because of increased patrols related to the military situation developing with the Hittites. If you don't leave tonight, we'll have to wait for another opportunity that might not come for weeks or months, and by then the current investigation may have progressed too far to prevent discovery. The deadline adds urgency to a decision that already feels impossible. Leave now and abandon any chance of seeing Amenhotep again, but preserve the lives of everyone who helped create your hidden paradise. Stay and risk not just your own life, but the lives of dozens of people whose only crime was following their pharaoh's orders to protect his secret love. The morning hours pass in a state of suspended animation as you go through the motions of your usual routine, while your mind races through scenarios and consequences, weighing options that all seem to lead to forms of loss that will fundamentally alter who you are and what your life means. The luxury that has surrounded you for months now feels like stage decoration in a play that's about to end in tragedy. The silk sheets, the golden ornaments, the rare delicacies, the philosophical texts, all suddenly seem fragile and temporary, already belonging to the past rather than the present, memories that will have to sustain you through whatever future you choose. Around midday, you hear sounds that definitely don't belong to the usual palace routine. Footsteps that are too heavy, too numerous, moving with the purposeful rhythm of official business, rather than the careful discretion that usually characterizes activity near your chambers. Voices that carry the authority of people who don't need to whisper, who have the right to go wherever they choose and ask whatever questions occur to them. The sounds grow closer throughout the afternoon, accompanied by what you now recognize as the systematic examination of architectural features. You can hear tools being used to tap walls and probe for hollow spaces, voices discussing measurements and comparing them to written documents, the authoritative tone of people who have found irregularities requiring further investigation. Enkesenemen appears in your doorway, her face pale with an expression that communicates everything before she speaks a word. The moment of abstract danger has become immediate and concrete. The investigation has reached your section of the palace. "They're here," she says simply. Queen Tai's architectural inspector, accompanied by 2 guards and a scribe to record any irregularities they discover. They're currently examining the chambers 3 doors down from yours, working systematically toward this section. They're not just looking for structural problems. They're mapping the actual layout of this part of the palace and comparing it to official blueprints that don't acknowledge the existence of your chambers. The systematic nature of their approach eliminates any hope that they might miss the concealed entrances or fail to notice the discrepancies that your concealment requires. They know what they're looking for and have the tools and expertise necessary to find it. Discovery is no longer a possibility, but a certainty, with only timing remaining uncertain. How long before they reach this room? You ask, though you can already hear their voices growing closer, their examination becoming more thorough as they approach chambers that will show the most dramatic differences between official plans and actual construction. Perhaps an hour, no more than 2, Enkesenemen estimates. They're being very thorough, but they're also efficient. They clearly have specific objectives and the knowledge necessary to achieve them quickly. The time for decision has arrived much sooner than expected, compressed from hours into minutes by the relentless advance of discovery. You have perhaps 90 minutes to choose between immediate escape and the hope that somehow this inspection will overlook evidence that seems impossible to miss. If I leave now, what happens to you and the others? You ask, though you know the answer will probably determine your choice regardless of your personal preferences. The bonds of loyalty and affection that have developed during months of shared secrecy make it impossible to consider only your own survival. We follow the emergency protocols, Enkesenemen explains. Scatter to different assignments throughout the palace, maintain normal routines, express appropriate surprise and ignorance if questions are asked. Some of us might be investigated, but without evidence of ongoing conspiracy, most should survive. The death of the kitchen servant and the transfer of the other 2 create enough uncertainty about the extent of knowledge that investigators might not pursue every possible connection. And if I'm discovered here, we all die, she states with brutal clarity. Probably within days, definitely within weeks. Public executions to demonstrate the consequences of betraying royal trust and participating in deceptions that threaten the stability of the divine order that legitimizes Pharaoh's rule. The choice becomes clear when stated so directly, yet your heart rebels against the logic your mind accepts. Leaving means abandoning not just Amenhotep, but the only period of genuine happiness and intellectual fulfillment you've ever experienced. These months of hidden luxury have been more than just physical comfort. They've been a time when you felt truly valued, mentally stimulated, emotionally connected in ways that your previous life as a minor scribe never approached. But staying means condemning to death people who trusted you enough to risk their own lives protecting yours. Enkesenemen, who has managed your daily needs with kindness and patience that has made her feel like family. The guards who have stood silent watches to ensure your safety. The servants who have prepared your meals, maintained your chambers, and enabled the illusion that you could exist in luxury without consequences. Prepare for immediate departure, you say, the words feeling like stones in your throat. I need a few minutes too. You can't finish the sentence. Can't name what you need to do in these final moments in the only place you've ever felt truly at home. Enkesenemen nods with what looks like relief mixed with sadness, her professional composure not entirely concealing the personal loss she feels at your departure. I'll have everything ready. Bring nothing that could be traced back to the palace, nothing distinctive enough to identify you if you're stopped during the journey. The boat crew believes they're transporting a merchant's daughter fleeing an unwanted marriage arrangement. Your identity as the Pharaoh's hidden lover dies in this room. The transformation required feels like a form of death, a complete abandonment of an identity that has become more real to you than the person you were before these chambers became your world. You're not just leaving a place, but ceasing to exist as someone who mattered to the most powerful person in the known world. Enkisenamen withdraws to make the final preparations, leaving you alone with the impossible task of saying goodbye to a life that has felt like a beautiful dream and a nightmare simultaneously. You move through the chambers that have been your universe, touching objects that will soon be evidence of a conspiracy, remembering moments that will have to sustain you through whatever life awaits beyond these walls. In the bathing chamber, you run your fingers over the polished marble where warm water has cascaded over your skin countless times, where gentle hands have massaged away tensions and applied oils that made you feel like someone worthy of such attention. The engineering marvels that brought sacred spring water to this hidden space will continue functioning long after you're gone, creating beauty for no one, maintaining perfection in service of emptiness. In the library alcove, you touch the scrolls that have educated and entertained you, the poetry and philosophy that have given you thoughts worth sharing with a pharaoh, ideas complex enough to sustain conversations that felt like the most important exchanges of human understanding ever conducted. These texts will remain, their wisdom available to no one, their beauty existing without appreciation. In the sleeping chamber, you press your hand to the silk sheets where you've dreamed dreams of a love that transcended social boundaries and political limitations, where you've experienced levels of comfort and security that felt like what the afterlife might offer to souls who had lived virtuous lives. The bed will be stripped and the chamber sealed, their luxury converted to emptiness, their possibility reduced to historical footnote. The sound of voices grows significantly closer, accompanied now by the unmistakable scraping of tools against stone and the authoritative tone of people who have definitely found something interesting. They've discovered the architectural irregularities that your concealment requires, the modifications that create space for chambers that don't appear on any official plan. You change into the simple traveling clothes that Enkisenamen has provided, rough linen that marks you as a person of modest means rather than someone accustomed to silk and gold. The transformation is more than physical. You're literally putting on a new identity, becoming someone who could plausibly be traveling by riverboat without arousing official attention or creating administrative curiosity. The coarse fabric feels foreign against skin that has grown accustomed to the finest materials available to human civilization. Your body rebels against clothing designed for utility rather than beauty, garments that serve practical purposes without any consideration for aesthetic pleasure or status communication. The contrast makes vivid how completely your physical existence has been transformed during months of impossible luxury. A soft whistle from the corridor signals that it's time. The sound carries encoded meanings that have become as familiar as spoken language during months of communication through subtle signals, designed to maintain security while enabling coordination. Tonight, the whistle speaks of urgency, finality, and the kind of loss that changes everything forever. You take one final look around the chambers that have been your paradise and your prison, memorizing details that will have to last you for whatever lifetime remains. The golden wind chimes that sang you to sleep so many nights with their mathematically precise harmonics. The carved walls that depicted gods and mortals in scenes of eternal love, their artistic perfection, encoding philosophical concepts about passion that transcends temporal limitations. The cushions where you and Amenhotep shared conversations that felt like the most important words ever spoken, exchanges that seemed to justify any risk and validate any sacrifice. The alcoves filled with treasures gathered from across the known world, each object chosen specifically to stimulate discussion and provide material for the kind of intellectual intimacy that had made your relationship feel like the center of human experience. All of it will remain, but none of it will retain meaning once you're gone. The chambers will become evidence rather than sanctuary, their beauty converted to proof of conspiracy, their luxury transformed into demonstrations of betrayal that must be punished to maintain the order that keeps empires functioning. Then you follow Ankh-Senamen through passages that exist in the negative spaces of the palace's official architecture, corridors that were built for exactly this purpose, when architects first designed concealment systems that acknowledge the dangerous nature of royal secrets. The path winds downward through limestone tunnels that predate the current palace, ancient passages that have hidden royal scandals for generations, their existence known only to those who need to manage the intersection between power and passion. Behind you, you hear the sound of discovery taking definitive form. Voices raised in excitement rather than professional routine, the scraping of concealed doors being forced open for the first time in months, footsteps entering chambers that officially don't exist. They've found your rooms, your evidence, your proof of impossible existence. Soon they'll find traces of occupancy, too recent to explain a way through reference to historical use. Personal items that can't be dismissed as artifacts from previous occupants. Food remnants that indicate someone has been living in luxury in spaces that don't appear on any architectural plan approved by royal administration. The tunnel system that carries you away from discovery represents engineering knowledge accumulated over centuries of royal need for concealment and escape. These passages connect two waterways that have served Egyptian civilization since its earliest development, underground rivers that provided both transportation and concealment for people whose survival depended on remaining invisible to official observation. The tunnel ends at a water gate, where the Nile laps against stone steps worn smooth by centuries of secret comings and goings, their surfaces polished by the feet of people whose stories never entered official histories, but whose experiences shaped the hidden currents that determine how empires actually function. A small boat waits, its crew carefully selected for their loyalty and their deliberate ignorance of exactly who they're helping to escape. To them, you're just another political refugee fleeing palace intrigue, a story common enough in the capital of an empire built on the careful management of power and the systematic elimination of threats to established order. They've been told enough to understand their role without knowing enough to become dangerous witnesses if questioned about their activities. Ankh-Senamen helps you into the boat with movements that are gentle despite the urgency of the situation, her touch conveying affection and regret that professional necessity prevents her from expressing more directly. The journey to the Temple of Amun will take 3 days by water, she explains. From there, other arrangements can be made depending on how the situation develops in the palace. You'll be contacted when it's safe to communicate, if such communication ever becomes possible again. The conditional nature of future contact acknowledges the reality that you may be disappearing permanently, not just temporarily. The person who has lived in golden chambers and shared thoughts with a pharaoh may be ending as completely as if you were facing physical execution. What about Amenhotep? You ask, though you're not sure you want to hear speculation about how he'll respond to learning that his secret love has vanished without explanation or opportunity for farewell. When will he know what happened? Soon, Ankh-Senamen replies. As soon as his military meetings conclude, and he's informed about the discovery in the hidden chambers. He'll understand immediately what it means and why you had to disappear without waiting for his input or permission. He knows you well enough to understand that you would choose his safety over your own happiness. The boat begins to move, carried by current that has sustained Egyptian civilization for thousands of years. Water that connects all parts of the empire and provides the liquid highways that make communication and transportation possible across vast distances. You watch the palace walls recede, taking with them everything that has defined your life for the past year. The luxury, the intellectual stimulation, the sense of being uniquely valued by the most powerful person in the known world. All of it shrinks with distance until it becomes just another building complex on the horizon, indistinguishable from the administrative structures that house the mundane business of empire management. As the boat carries you away from everything you've learned to treasure, you realize that you're not just fleeing discovery, but entering a kind of death. The person you've been for these months, the hidden lover who lived in chambers that officially didn't exist and shared ideas with someone who shaped the destiny of millions, that person is ending as completely as if you'd been executed in the palace courtyard. What emerges from this escape will be someone new, shaped by exile and loss, rather than luxury and love, defined by what you've had to abandon, rather than what you've been privileged to experience. The transformation feels like the most profound change possible short of actual physical death. The sun begins its descent toward the western horizon, painting the Nile in shades of gold and crimson that remind you painfully of the garden chamber where you and Amenhotep shared your most precious moments. The colors seem to mock your loss, their beauty emphasizing the contrast between what you're leaving behind and what you're moving toward. Somewhere behind you, in the palace that grows smaller with each stroke of the oars, Amenhotep is still trapped in military meetings, still unaware that his secret love has vanished as completely as if you'd never existed. Soon, servants will inform him that the hidden chambers have been discovered and their occupant has disappeared. He'll understand immediately the choice you faced and the decision you made without consulting him. But understanding and acceptance are different emotional states, and you wonder if he'll ever forgive you for the decision you made without his input, for choosing his political survival over the love that made both your lives feel worth living. The choice was obvious given the circumstances, but obvious choices can still create wounds that never heal completely. The boat moves steadily down the river, carrying you toward an uncertain future that can only be less than the impossible paradise you're leaving behind. The motion creates a rhythm that matches the beating of your heart, a percussion that seems to count down the remaining moments of a life that will never again touch such heights of luxury, intellectual stimulation, and emotional fulfillment. Behind you, the palace becomes a distant glow on the horizon, a memory that will have to sustain you through whatever years remain of an existence that will be measured by survival rather than joy, safety rather than love, duty rather than the passionate intensity that once made every day feel like a gift worth any price. As darkness falls over the Nile, transforming the water into a black mirror that reflects stars without revealing the depths beneath the surface, you realize that you're experiencing something that most people never face, the conscious end of a perfect period of life, the deliberate conclusion of a time when everything you wanted was yours. It's ending not because the love died or the luxury became meaningless, but because perfection is inherently unstable in a world built on power, politics, and the careful management of public perception. Your happiness was constructed on secrecy, and secrets by their nature are temporary things, always seeking the light that will ultimately destroy them. The boat carries you through the night toward a future that can only be a diminishment of what you're abandoning. But it's carrying you toward life, toward the possibility of survival, toward hope that maybe, someday, love might find a way to exist without requiring such terrible sacrifices and such constant fear of discovery. For now, that possibility is enough to justify the choice you've made, the paradise you've abandoned, the love you've protected by giving it up. The river flows on, indifferent to human joy and sorrow, carrying you away from everything that mattered toward whatever comes next in a life that will never again approach the extraordinary heights you've known. 5 years have passed since the boat carried you away from golden chambers and impossible love. 5 years that have transformed you from a pharaoh's secret treasure into someone whose value is measured by usefulness rather than uniqueness, whose identity depends on service rather than being cherished. The woman who once lived in hidden luxury has evolved through necessity into a temple scribe whose worth lies in her skills and her discretion, rather than in her capacity to inspire royal passion. The Temple of Amun has become your world in ways that your palace chambers never quite managed, despite their luxury and beauty. The hidden rooms where you lived as Amenhotep's lover were always temporary, always contingent on maintaining an impossible deception. Here, your existence is acknowledged and valued, even if the full truth of your past remains hidden behind cover stories about fleeing and unwanted marriage. Your hands, once soft from daily applications of precious oils applied by servants trained in the healing arts, now bear the permanent stains of ink and the calluses that come from years of manual labor. The transformation is not just physical, but philosophical. You've learned to find satisfaction in work that serves purposes larger than personal pleasure, in accomplishments that benefit communities rather than individuals. The temple library where you spend most of your days represents a different kind of treasure house than the chambers where you once lived. Instead of silk and gold, you're surrounded by wisdom accumulated over thousands of years, scrolls and tablets that record the intellectual achievements of countless generations. The wealth here is measured in knowledge rather than material luxury, but it has proven no less valuable for understanding the complexity of human experience. Your body has grown lean from simple temple meals and the physical demands of maintaining ancient buildings, but the weight loss has brought a kind of functional strength that your pampered palace existence never provided. You can work for hours without fatigue, carry heavy loads without strain, endure discomfort without complaint. The soft curves that came from royal delicacies have been replaced by the efficient musculature of someone whose survival depends on her own capabilities. Your mind, once stimulated by philosophical discussions with a Pharaoh who had access to the world's greatest thinkers, now finds its challenges in deciphering damaged papyri, translating texts between languages, and teaching complex concepts to young people whose education will determine their ability to serve both gods and community. The intellectual work is different, but no less demanding than your previous conversations about eternal forms and the nature of reality. The routine of temple life has created its own rhythms and satisfactions. You wake before dawn to join community prayers that connect you to spiritual traditions, extending back to the earliest development of Egyptian civilization. The ritual words and gestures provide a sense of continuity and belonging that your hidden palace life, despite its luxury, could never offer. Your daily work involves copying religious texts, but these are not the administrative documents that filled your original career as a working scribe. These texts explore questions about the relationship between human experience and divine purpose, the nature of mortality, and the possibility of transcendence, the ways that individual lives connect to cosmic patterns that extend beyond any single person's understanding. The copying work requires precision that has refined your technical skills while deepening your understanding of the philosophical and spiritual concepts that have sustained Egyptian civilization through thousands of years of political change. Each text you reproduce becomes part of your own education, expanding your knowledge in directions that your conversations with Amenhotep only began to explore. Your teaching responsibilities have proven unexpectedly rewarding. Young priestesses come to you for instruction in mathematics, writing, and the complex symbolic systems that encode religious knowledge in forms that can be transmitted across generations. Working with these students has taught you that the satisfaction of enabling other people's learning can be as fulfilling as acquiring knowledge for yourself. The students see you as someone whose competence and dedication make her worthy of respect, unaware that your skills were developed during months of luxury that most of them could never imagine. To them, you're simply a teacher whose knowledge and patience help them master challenges that will determine their ability to serve their community. The anonymity is liberating in ways you hadn't expected, but today, everything changes again. You're working in the temple library, cataloging a collection of scrolls recently acquired from a private estate whose owner died without direct heirs, when a commotion in the main courtyard draws your attention away from the administrative details that usually absorb your morning hours. Through the high windows that provide light for detailed work while maintaining the cool interior temperatures necessary for preserving ancient texts, you can see a formal procession approaching the temple gates. The sight of royal standards makes your heart race with emotions you haven't experienced in years, a mixture of fear and hope that reminds you how much of your past remains unresolved, despite the new life you've built. For 5 years, you've lived with the knowledge that discovery could still mean death, that your past remains dangerous enough to destroy not just you, but anyone who has sheltered you. The temple provides sanctuary, but that protection depends on maintaining the fiction that you're simply a refugee from family conflict, rather than someone whose very existence constitutes evidence of conspiracy against royal authority. But you've also harbored dreams that you've tried to suppress, impossible fantasies that somehow, someday, the love you sacrificed might find a way to reach across the distance that separates your new life from your old one. The sight of royal standards reawakens hopes that you've spent years learning to control. Nefrit, who has become your closest friend during your years of temple residence, appears at your elbow with the tense alertness that all temple refugees develop when the outside world intrudes on their carefully constructed safety. She's a woman whose own past remains largely mysterious, but whose intelligence and discretion have made her invaluable to the temple administration and a trusted companion in your daily life. Royal delegation, she observes, though the statement is unnecessary given the obvious evidence visible through the windows. High priest's been expecting them, apparently. Word is they're here about some kind of historical research, something to do with architectural records from the time of the current Pharaoh's father. The mention of architectural records sends a familiar chill through your body, awakening memories of the investigation that forced your flight from the palace. Your relationship with Amenhotep was discovered through exactly such research. Queen Tai's systematic examination of discrepancies between official building plans and actual palace construction. If royal scholars are now conducting similar investigations into historical architectural documents, they might be looking for patterns of hidden construction that extend beyond your specific case. Perhaps your story has become part of a larger study of how royal secrets have been concealed throughout Egyptian history, or perhaps someone is seeking to understand the methods used to create and maintain such elaborate deceptions. Any idea why they'd bring that kind of research to a temple? You ask, trying to keep your voice casual, despite the anxiety that makes normal breathing feel like a conscious effort requiring deliberate control. The calm you've cultivated during 5 years of temple life feels suddenly fragile, threatened by the return of fears you thought you'd learn to manage. Could be looking for ancient precedents, Nefrit suggests, her own voice carrying the carefully modulated tone that refugees learn to use when discussing anything that might touch on sensitive subjects. Temple records go back thousands of years, much further than most palace archives. If they want to understand how pharaohs have hidden things in the past, this would be the logical place to find documentation that extends beyond recent dynasties. The possibility that your own story has become the subject of historical research feels surreal and deeply threatening. Are scholars now studying the hidden chambers where you lived, analyzing the architectural techniques that concealed your existence, trying to understand the engineering methods used to maintain such an elaborate deception? Have you become a case study in royal secrecy, a historical example that demonstrates both the possibilities and the limitations of concealing forbidden relationships? More disturbing is the question of why such research would be conducted now, 5 years after your disappearance. The most logical explanation is that similar situations have developed, that other members of the royal family have created relationships requiring concealment, and that architects need to understand proven methods for constructing and maintaining hidden spaces within official buildings. You return to your copying work, but concentration proves impossible as your mind races through implications and possibilities. Every sound from the courtyard makes you look up from the papyrus you're supposed to be transcribing. Every footstep in the library corridor makes you wonder if someone is coming to question you about knowledge you're not supposed to possess. The peaceful routine of temple life that has sustained you for 5 years feels suddenly fragile, threatened by reminders that your past remains a living danger rather than simply a source of private grief. The scholarly pursuits that have given meaning to your exile, the teaching relationships that have provided purpose, the spiritual practices that have offered comfort, all of it could be destroyed if your true identity becomes known to the wrong people. Hours pass in this state of heightened alertness before a temple servant arrives with a message that the high priest requests your presence in his private chambers. The summons could mean anything from routine administrative business to the end of your 5 years of sanctuary, but the timing suggests a connection to the royal delegation that has disrupted the day's normal activities. You follow the servant through corridors that have become as familiar as the hidden passages of the palace once were, past walls decorated with scenes that tell stories about the eternal struggle between order and chaos, divine justice and human limitation, the search for truth and the acceptance of mystery. The art serves both decorative and educational purposes, providing visual reminders of the philosophical concepts that guide temple life. The high priest receives you in a room lined with scrolls that record thousands of years of Egyptian religious and political history, documents that chronicle the rise and fall of dynasties, the development of spiritual practices, and the complex relationships between temporal power and eternal truth. He's an elderly man whose eyes hold the kind of deep intelligence that comes from decades of managing the delicate balance between serving gods and accommodating pharaohs. His position requires him to maintain neutrality in political conflicts while protecting people who seek sanctuary from those same conflicts. The temple's independence depends on his ability to provide refuge without becoming involved in the disputes that create the need for refuge. It's a balance that requires wisdom, courage, and the kind of diplomatic skill that enables survival in situations where choosing sides could mean destruction. "Sit," he says, gesturing to a simple wooden chair positioned across from his own seat. The furniture reflects the temple's philosophy of finding beauty in simplicity rather than luxury, of valuing function and durability over decorative display. "We need to discuss your situation and some developments that may affect your continued residence here." The formal tone suggests that whatever follows will be consequential, that the visit from royal researchers has somehow changed the carefully maintained equilibrium that has protected you for 5 years. The complexity of your situation means that changes in external circumstances can have impacts that extend far beyond their apparent immediate significance. The delegation that arrived today brought interesting requests. The high priest continues, his voice carrying the careful neutrality that has enabled him to navigate decades of political complexity without compromising his spiritual authority or endangering the people under his protection. They're researching construction techniques used during the reign of Amenhotep III, specifically methods for creating concealed spaces within royal buildings. You remain silent, unsure whether this is a fishing expedition designed to see how you react to mentions of your past, or genuine historical research that happens to touch on subjects relevant to your personal story. The high priest's expression reveals nothing about his own knowledge or suspicions regarding your true background. "They want access to our architectural archives," he explains, "our records of temple construction projects that might provide insights into how such specialized work was accomplished in previous eras. The techniques for creating hidden chambers require engineering knowledge that has been accumulated over centuries, and much of that knowledge has been preserved in temple records." The request makes perfect sense from a scholarly perspective, but it also creates obvious dangers for someone whose existence was made possible by exactly the kind of construction techniques under investigation. If researchers examine detailed records of concealment methods, they might be able to deduce information about specific applications of those methods. They also, the high priest continues, his tone becoming more significant, brought a personal message for someone who might be residing here under our protection. Someone whose knowledge of the specific chambers they're researching could provide valuable insights for their scholarly work. The words seem to hang in the air like incense smoke, visible and significant but difficult to grasp directly. Despite 5 years of complete separation from your former life, someone knows where you are and wants to make contact. The question is whether this contact represents opportunity or danger, rescue or trap, the possibility of reunion or the certainty of exposure. What kind of message? You ask, though you're not certain you want to hear the answer. The safety you've built during years of temple life depends on maintaining distance from your past, and any communication that bridges that distance creates risks that could destroy everything you've worked to establish. The high priest produces a small scroll sealed with wax that bears no official markings, no royal insignia that would identify its origin or authenticate its authority. It's the kind of message that could be denied if necessary, dismissed as unimportant if its delivery created complications that required official response. The messenger indicated that this should be given to someone who would understand its significance without explanation, the high priest says. He suggested that the intended recipient would know immediately whether the message was meant for her, and that no response would also be considered a valid answer. You take the scroll with hands that tremble slightly despite your efforts to maintain composure, feeling the weight of papyrus that might contain everything you've hoped for or everything you've feared during 5 years of careful anonymity. The wax seal breaks easily under your fingers, revealing text written in a hand you recognize immediately despite the years that have passed since you last saw Amenhotep's distinctive script. The message is brief but carefully constructed, written in the philosophical metaphorical language you and Amenhotep developed during your months of hidden conversations when discussing sensitive subjects in settings where others might overhear. Time has proven that some architectural problems cannot be solved through conventional methods alone. The original designer seeks consultation with the only person who fully understood the complexity of the original project. If such consultation is possible, arrangements can be made that ensure appropriate discretion, while allowing examination of questions that have remained unanswered for too long. The work was left incomplete, and completion requires the insights that only shared experience can provide. It's unsigned, but the phrasing is unmistakably Amenhotep's, the kind of coded communication that appears to be about construction projects while actually discussing relationship dynamics and emotional needs. He's requesting a meeting, suggesting that he has questions about your shared past that can only be answered through direct conversation. But the message is also carefully constructed to provide plausible denial if it falls into the wrong hands. A casual reader would see only an architect seeking consultation with a former colleague about technical problems that require specialized knowledge. Only someone with intimate understanding of your relationship would recognize that it's actually a former lover requesting reunion with the person he was forced to lose. The reference to incomplete work suggests that Amenhotep feels your relationship ended without proper resolution, that questions remain unanswered and emotions remain unprocessed. The offer to arrange discreet meetings indicates that he's developed methods for communication that could allow contact without creating the kinds of risks that forced your original separation. The messenger indicated that a response is expected, the high priest says, but he also emphasized that no response is also a valid answer, one that would be understood and respected without creating any pressure for future communication. You stare at the message, rereading words that offer the possibility of seeing Amenhotep again, while making clear that the choice is entirely yours. He's not using his royal authority to compel your cooperation or demanding answers to questions you might not be ready to address. He's simply asking if you're willing to risk the safety you've built during 5 years of temple life for the chance to resolve whatever unfinished business remains between you. The decision feels impossibly complex because both alternatives carry significant costs. Meeting with Amenhotep would risk the security that has allowed you to build a meaningful life in exile, but it would also provide the opportunity to address questions that have haunted your dreams and shaped your understanding of love, sacrifice, and the relationship between personal happiness and ethical responsibility. Refusing the meeting would preserve your safety, but might mean losing forever the chance to understand what your relationship meant to Amenhotep, whether he's forgiven you for the decision to disappear without consultation, whether the love that once justified any risk might still have power to transform both your lives. If I were to agree to such a consultation, you say carefully, testing the possibilities without committing to any specific course of action, what would be the practical arrangements? How could such a meeting be conducted without creating new dangers for the people who have protected me? Discreet and carefully planned. The high priest responds. The researchers plan to spend several days examining our architectural archives, conducting interviews with temple personnel who have knowledge of construction techniques. and documenting methods that have been used to create specialized spaces within religious buildings. The explanation makes clear that considerable thought has been devoted to creating cover for unusual activities. During that time, he continues, private consultations with temple residents who possess relevant knowledge would be considered routine scholarly activity. Such meetings would be documented only as research sessions, with no record of specific participants or topics discussed beyond general subject areas. The arrangements suggest that Amenhotep has spent years, not months, planning for this possibility. He's developed cover stories, established protocols, and created practical methods that would allow you to meet without exposing yourself or anyone who has helped you to new risks. The complexity of the planning indicates how much careful thought has gone into making reunion possible, while maintaining the security that protects everyone involved. How much time do I have to decide? You ask, knowing that the answer will determine whether you have the opportunity to carefully consider all implications, or must make an immediate choice based on incomplete information. The researchers will begin their archival work tomorrow morning, the high priest explains. If consultation is to happen, it would need to be arranged within the next 2 days, while their presence here provides natural cover for unusual activities and unexpected meetings. The timeline forces you to confront immediately the choice you've been avoiding for 5 years, whether the love you sacrificed for safety was worth preserving, whether the relationship that once justified risking everything might still have value that outweighs the dangers of resuming contact. During 5 years of temple life, you've built a new identity based on usefulness rather than passion, safety rather than intensity, service rather than the kind of love that makes ordinary people feel extraordinary. It's been a sustainable existence, meaningful in its own way, sufficient for survival and even modest forms of happiness. You've found satisfaction in teaching young priestesses who depend on your knowledge for their spiritual and intellectual development. You've discovered purpose in preserving ancient texts that contain wisdom accumulated over thousands of years. You've developed friendships based on shared daily experiences rather than the extraordinary circumstances that characterized your palace life. But it's also been a life deliberately diminished from what you once experienced, a careful reduction of possibility designed to eliminate both ecstasy and catastrophe. You've learned to value stability over excitement, security over the kind of love that transforms everything it touches, predictable satisfaction over the intensity that once made every day feel like a gift. The message from Amenhotep reminds you that transformation might still be possible, that the life you've accepted as final might actually be just another temporary accommodation to circumstances that could change again. But it also reminds you that such transformation comes with prices that include not just your own safety, but the security of everyone who has protected you during your years of exile. You spend the evening walking through temple gardens where useful plants grow in orderly rows, their purpose clear, and their cultivation managed through methods developed over generations of practical experience. The organization reflects the temple's approach to life. Everything has a function. Nothing is wasted. Beauty emerges from harmony between human needs and natural capabilities. The contrast with the exotic flowers that grew in Amenhotep's private gardens could not be more complete. Those plants existed purely for aesthetic pleasure, their cultivation requiring enormous resources to produce beauty that served no practical purpose beyond providing settings for romantic encounters. The memory of their perfection still has the power to make your current surroundings seem austere by comparison. As you walk among herbs that will be used for healing and vegetables that will feed the temple community, you consider the fundamental choice that has shaped every major decision of your adult life, whether to choose safety or love, security or intensity, the sustainable or the impossible. 5 years ago, you chose safety and lost love, but that choice preserved your life and the lives of everyone who had helped create your hidden paradise. Now you have the opportunity to choose love again, but this time the risks are different, the stakes potentially lower, the possibilities for resolution greater than they were when discovery meant certain death. The woman who once lived in golden chambers and shared thoughts with a pharaoh whispers that some things are worth any risk, that love like yours justifies whatever sacrifices it demands, that the intensity you once shared was more valuable than any amount of security or practical satisfaction. But the woman who has spent 5 years copying religious texts and teaching temple novices argues that safety is precious, that the quiet satisfaction of useful work is more reliable than the emotional extremes that come with extraordinary passion, that the life you've built provides meaning without requiring constant fear. Both women are you. Both voices represent legitimate aspects of who you've become and who you might yet be. The choice between them will determine not just whether you meet with Amenhotep, but what kind of person you decide to be for whatever years remain of a life that has already been more dramatic and more consequential than most humans ever experience. The temple bells ring the evening hour, calling the community to prayers that mark the end of another day of useful routine, another day of safety, purchased through careful adherence to practices that maintain distance from the dangerous complexities of power and passion. Tomorrow, you'll need to decide whether that life is sufficient for the person you've become, or whether the person you once were still has claims on your future that no amount of practical wisdom can dismiss. As you join your voice to the evening prayers, speaking words that have been repeated for thousands of years by people facing their own impossible choices, you realize that you're standing at another threshold, another moment when your decision will determine the entire trajectory of whatever life remains ahead of you. The choice waits for morning, as consequential as any decision you've ever faced, as dangerous as any risk you've ever taken, as potentially transformative as the love that started everything, and might yet have the power to change everything again. Morning arrives with the kind of crystalline clarity that makes every detail of the world seem significant, as if the universe itself is holding its breath, while you make the decision that will determine the shape of your remaining years. You wake before the temple bells announce the dawn prayers, your mind already fully alert despite having slept little during a night filled with dreams that replayed every moment of your months with Amenhotep. The dreams were vivid enough that waking feels like a form of loss, a return to a reality that lacks the golden light and impossible luxury that characterized your hidden life. But they were also painful reminders of how completely that world ended, how final the separation felt when you made the choice to flee, rather than risk the lives of everyone who had protected your secret existence. Now, 5 years later, you face another choice that feels equally consequential, whether to risk the security you've built for the possibility of understanding what your relationship meant to the man who once ruled an empire, but found his greatest treasure in conversations shared with someone who officially didn't exist. You dress in the simple linen garments that have become your daily uniform, clothing that marks you as someone who has chosen substance over style, usefulness over luxury. The fabric is clean and well maintained, but deliberately unremarkable, designed to allow you to move through temple life without attracting attention or inspiring questions about your background. The contrast with the silk and gold you once wore feels like putting on a different identity, reminding you of how completely you've transformed from a pharaoh's hidden lover into a temple scribe whose value lies in her skills rather than her capacity to inspire royal passion. The transformation has been successful enough that sometimes you forget the person you used to be, until moments like this when memory makes the past feel more real than the present. You make your way to the library where your usual work awaits, but concentration proves impossible as your mind returns repeatedly to the decision you must make before the day ends. Every scroll you attempt to copy, every student question you try to answer, every routine task that normally provides satisfaction now feels like a distraction from the larger question of whether you're brave enough to risk everything you've built for the chance to reclaim something you thought was lost forever. Around midday, as you're struggling to focus on a particularly complex text about mathematical principles used in temple construction, you notice unusual activity in the main courtyard. Royal scholars have arrived to begin their examination of the temple's architectural archives, their presence marked by the kind of careful formality that accompanies any interaction between religious and governmental authorities. You can see them through the library windows, a small group of men whose clothing and bearing identify them as educated professionals rather than royal courtiers. They move with the purposeful efficiency of people who understand exactly what they're looking for and have developed systematic methods for finding it in complex documentary collections. Their leader appears to be a middle-aged man whose demeanor suggests both scholarly authority and political sophistication, someone comfortable operating in environments where intellectual work intersects with governmental power. He directs the others with quiet competence while maintaining the respectful attitude appropriate for visitors to a sacred space. Watching them work, you realize that you're observing the kind of careful research that discovered your hidden chambers 5 years ago. The systematic examination of records, the comparison of official documents with physical evidence, the patient reconstruction of information that someone hoped would remain hidden. The methods that once threatened your existence are now being employed for purposes that might offer hope for reunion. As the afternoon progresses, you find yourself unconsciously tracking the scholars' movements through the temple complex, noting when they examine documents in areas close to the library, observing how they interact with temple personnel who provide access to restricted archives. Their presence creates a subtle tension that affects everyone, a reminder that the outside world can intrude on temple sanctuary in ways that change everything. Late in the afternoon, a young temple servant approaches your workstation with a message that the high priest requests your presence for a brief consultation with the visiting scholars. The summons could be routine, part of their systematic interviews with temple personnel who have specialized knowledge, or it could be the moment when you must decide whether to reveal yourself to Amenhotep or maintain the anonymity that has protected you for 5 years. You follow the servant through corridors that seem different somehow, charged with possibility and danger in ways that make familiar spaces feel foreign. Every step takes you closer to a moment that could change everything, could restore what you thought was lost forever, or destroy what you've spent years building as a replacement. The high priest's consultation chamber has been arranged to facilitate scholarly discussion, with additional chairs positioned around a table covered with architectural drawings and historical documents. The visiting scholars rise politely when you enter, their manner conveying the kind of professional courtesy appropriate for consulting with someone who possesses specialized knowledge. And then you see him, and the careful composure you've maintained throughout the day dissolves like morning mist touched by desert sun. Amenhotep sits among the scholars, wearing the simple clothing of an educated professional rather than the regalia of divine kingship, but his presence fills the room with an intensity that makes breathing feel like a conscious effort requiring deliberate control. 5 years have changed him in ways that make your heart ache with recognition and loss. His face shows the accumulated weight of responsibilities that have grown heavier with time, lines that speak of decisions affecting millions of lives, of pressures that never diminish, of the constant burden of being responsible for maintaining cosmic order through human wisdom. But his eyes, when they meet yours across the space that separates scholar from consultant, hold the same intelligence and warmth that once made conversations about philosophy feel like the most important exchanges in human history. For a moment that seems to last forever, you see not the Pharaoh who rules an empire, but the man who once found his greatest pleasure in sharing ideas with someone who understood him completely. This is the temple scribe who has particular expertise in construction techniques used during earlier dynasties. The high priest explains, his voice carefully neutral as he manages the introduction that could either restore what was lost or destroy what has been rebuilt. Her knowledge of specialized architectural methods may provide insights relevant to your research. The formal words create a framework for conversation that allows both recognition and concealment, depending on how carefully the participants navigate the linguistic territory between truth and necessary fiction. You take the seat indicated by the high priest, close enough to Amenhotep to see the way his hands rest on the table, far enough away to maintain the pretense that you're strangers meeting for the first time. We're particularly interested in methods for creating concealed spaces within existing structures. One of the other scholars explains, his tone suggesting genuine academic curiosity rather than political investigation. Techniques that allow for the addition of functional chambers without compromising the structural integrity of the original building. The question provides perfect cover for the kind of detailed discussion that could allow you and Amenhotep to communicate while maintaining the appearance of scholarly consultation. You begin explaining the engineering principles involved, drawing on knowledge you gained through months of living in spaces created through exactly such techniques. As you speak, you become aware that Amenhotep is listening with an intensity that goes far beyond academic interest. His attention focuses on you with the same complete engagement that once characterized your private conversations, as if every word carries meanings that extend beyond their apparent subject matter. The most sophisticated examples, you continue, required coordination between multiple craftsmen working in sequence, each contributing specialized skills while maintaining ignorance of the overall project. The success of such work depended on careful management of information flow, ensuring that no single person possessed enough knowledge to compromise the entire enterprise. The metaphorical language allows you to describe not just construction techniques, but the human systems that sustained your hidden relationship. The network of people who enabled your existence while protecting themselves through deliberate limitations on what they knew about your true identity and significance. Such projects also required ongoing maintenance. You add, your voice remaining steady, despite the emotional complexity of discussing your shared past in coded terms. The concealed spaces needed regular attention to ensure they continued functioning as intended, but this maintenance had to be conducted without revealing the existence of what was being maintained. Amenhotep nods with the kind of understanding that goes beyond intellectual comprehension, his expression suggesting that he recognizes the layers of meaning in your explanation. When he speaks, his voice carries the same careful neutrality as yours, but underneath the scholarly tone, you hear echoes of the intimate conversations that once made your hidden chambers feel like the center of the universe. The original designers of such projects, he says, must have possessed extraordinary vision to conceive structures that served multiple purposes while appearing to serve only conventional functions. The integration of hidden elements with visible architecture requires not just technical skill, but artistic imagination of the highest order. His words acknowledge the beauty of what you created together, the way your relationship transcended its practical limitations to become something that felt like art, like poetry made manifest in the architecture of the heart. The recognition makes you feel seen and valued in ways that 5 years of useful temple work have never quite achieved. The conversation continues for over an hour, ranging across topics that allow both technical discussion and emotional communication, scholarly inquiry, and personal recognition. Other participants contribute questions and observations, but increasingly, the exchange becomes focused on the dialogue between you and Amenhotep, two people using the language of architecture to explore the landscape of memory and possibility. When the formal consultation concludes, you feel both exhausted and exhilarated, drained by the emotional complexity of the encounter, but energized by the confirmation that the connection between you and Amenhotep has survived 5 years of separation and transformation. The love that once justified any risk may have changed form, but it has not disappeared. As the scholars prepare to leave, Amenhotep approaches you with a request that sounds routine, but carries obvious additional significance. I wonder if you might be available for additional consultation tomorrow. There are aspects of the concealment techniques that would benefit from more detailed discussion, particularly the methods used to ensure long-term structural stability. The invitation offers the possibility of private conversation, time to address questions that cannot be answered in the presence of others, opportunity to explore whether the relationship that once defined both your lives might have a future that extends beyond scholarly consultation. I would be happy to provide whatever additional information might be useful. You reply, your voice steady, despite the acceleration of your heartbeat that makes every word feel significant. The temple's archives contain detailed documentation that might illuminate techniques not covered in today's discussion. The arrangement provides cover for a meeting that could last hours, sufficient time to move beyond coded communication into the kind of direct conversation that allows real understanding. But it also creates new risks. The possibility that extended private contact might reveal too much to observers who could draw dangerous conclusions about your relationship. That evening, you walk through temple gardens that have provided comfort during 5 years of exile, but tonight, the familiar spaces feel different, charged with anticipation and anxiety in equal measure. Tomorrow will bring either the restoration of what you thought was lost forever, or the final confirmation that some losses cannot be repaired, that some transformations cannot be reversed. The woman you become during years of temple life argues for caution, for protecting the security and satisfaction you've built through careful adherence to safe choices and practical limitations. But the woman you were during months of impossible love whispers that some risks are worth taking, that some possibilities justify any danger, that the heart's deepest truths deserve consideration, even when reason argues for safer alternatives. As you prepare for sleep that may or may not come easily, you realize that tomorrow will determine not just whether you and Amenhotep can find a way to bridge the distance that circumstances created between you, but whether you're brave enough to believe that love interrupted is not necessarily love ended, that stories which seem concluded might actually be only paused, waiting for the right moment to continue. The temple bells ring the final prayers of the day, marking the end of the last day when your choice remained unmade, when possibility existed alongside safety, when the future remained open to outcomes that could range from restoration to loss to something entirely new that neither memory nor imagination has yet conceived. Tomorrow will bring answers to questions that have shaped 5 years of exile, will determine whether the love that once transcended social boundaries and political limitations might prove strong enough to transcend time and transformation as well. The choice to risk everything for the possibility of reclaiming what was lost awaits the sunrise, as consequential and uncertain as any decision you've ever faced. But tonight, for these final hours before everything changes again, you rest in the space between past and future, memory and hope, the life you've built and the life you once lived and might yet live again. The temple holds you in its ancient embrace, protecting your sleep while you gather strength for whatever tomorrow will bring to the question of whether some loves are strong enough to survive anything, even the choices made to preserve them. And so, we reach the end of tonight's journey through golden chambers and impossible choices, through the architecture of the heart and the engineering of survival. As you return from ancient Egypt to your own time and place, carry with you this question: what would you sacrifice for love? And what would you sacrifice love itself to protect? In your modern world, you face none of the literal dangers that threatened our hidden lover. Your relationships don't require armies of conspirators to sustain them. Your passion doesn't need concealment in chambers that officially don't exist. You can love openly, choose freely, build lives together without fearing that discovery means death for everyone involved. Yet how often do we create our own hidden chambers, our own elaborate systems of concealment and protection? How often do we sacrifice authentic connection for the safety of keeping our hearts carefully guarded, our deepest feelings strategically unexpressed, our most important relationships regulated by fear of vulnerability, rather than guided by courage to love completely? The Pharaoh's lover faced a choice between love and survival, between personal happiness and the welfare of others, between the extraordinary and the sustainable. In the end, she chose survival and service, building a meaningful life from the ashes of impossible romance. But the story suggests that some endings might actually be interruptions, that some losses might be temporary, that love powerful enough to risk everything might also be strong enough to wait, to adapt, to find new forms of expression, even after its original circumstances have vanished. Consider the architectural marvels that surround your own heart. What hidden chambers have you built? What passages exist between your public self and your private truth? What systems of concealment protect you from discovery? And what might those systems be costing you in terms of authentic connection and genuine intimacy? Your love stories may lack the dramatic intensity of forbidden palace romance, where every stolen moment carried the possibility of execution and every conversation required perfect secrecy. But they possess something perhaps more valuable, the possibility of openness, the freedom to build rather than merely hide, the opportunity to create relationships that strengthen rather than threaten the foundations of your world. The hidden chambers were beautiful, filled with treasures that most humans never experience, perfumed with luxury that made every moment feel precious. But they were also prisons, gorgeous cages that protected through isolation, sanctuaries that preserved by cutting off connection to the larger world of human community and shared experience. Your relationships can be built in daylight, strengthened through visibility, enhanced by the support and witness of others who celebrate rather than threaten your connection. The love available to you may feel less dramatic than pharaonic passion, but it offers possibilities for growth, stability, and mutual support that hidden romance can never provide. Perhaps the greatest treasure you possess is not the intensity of secret love, but the freedom to love without secrecy, to choose connection without requiring concealment, to build relationships that enhance rather than endanger everyone they touch. In a world where love can be lived openly, the question becomes not how to hide your heart, but how to open it fully, not how to protect your feelings from discovery, but how to express them with courage and clarity. Tonight, as you settle into sleep in chambers that belong to you openly rather than through elaborate deception, remember that the greatest luxury is not golden wind chimes or silk sheets, but the simple freedom to love and be loved without fear. To choose your heart's truth without requiring anyone to risk their life to protect your secret. The Pharaoh's lover found meaning in service after losing the possibility of open love. But you live in a time when service and love need not be mutually exclusive, when relationships can contribute to rather than threaten community welfare, when the most profound intimacy can exist alongside the most generous connection to the larger world. Dream of architecture that conceals nothing, of chambers built to welcome rather than hide, of relationships so strong they add to rather than subtract from the world's store of beauty, wisdom, and hope. Your love stories may never inspire historical research or require scholarly consultation, but they have the chance to be lived fully, shared openly, and remembered fondly by people who knew you in the light, rather than in shadows. Rest well in that knowledge, and let the story of impossible love in ancient chambers remind you to cherish the possible love that surrounds you now. Where the greatest hiding place your heart needs is the safe embrace of someone who knows all your truths and loves you not despite them, but because of them. Good night, dreamers. May your chambers be filled with light, your architecture be built for welcome, and your love be strong enough to survive in the open air, where it can breathe freely and grow without limit, where it can be itself without apology or concealment, where it can become everything love was meant to be when given the freedom to flourish. Sleep peacefully, knowing that your love stories, whatever their complications, unfold in an age of unprecedented freedom to build rather than hide, to share rather than conceal, to love in the light rather than in shadows. The golden chambers were beautiful, but the golden age of love might very well be the one you're living in right now.